All right, so I just got back from watching The Watchers, the directorial debut of M. Night Shyamalan's daughter. I don't know if I know her name, Ishana. I think it's Ishana. It might not be, but I know it starts with an I. Ishana Night Shyamalan. Surprisingly enough, the apple does not far from the tree, does not fall far from the tree, and she makes movies. At least her first movie is a lot like a typical M. Night Shyamalan movie. It's a thriller, horror, more thriller than horror, but still you can put it in whichever category you want. And it's a mystery with twists and turns and revelations and all this stuff. So I do think it is quite surprising that she decided to basically make M. Night Shyamalan movies. I don't know if she's going to keep making movies like this, but I do think it's interesting that she's kind of doing what her dad does instead of, doing something else. But hey, if she wants to do that type of stuff, she can do it, whatever. So anyway, how is her first movie, The Watchers? Unfortunately, I don't think it is very good. I think it starts off okay, and then the more the movie goes on, the more boring it gets, unfortunately, which is not what you want for these thriller horror movies. Ideally, you want it to get more exciting as you go on. But the problem with this movie is that the more that is revealed, the less interesting it is, because your imagination, your mind, at least my mind, could imagine things a lot more interesting than what the movie reveals it to actually be. Also, the twist in this movie, because, these movies have to have at least one major twist, you can see coming a mile away. At least I could, and I don't think of myself as a particularly, person that thinks about twists all the time, but part through the movie, I'm like, oh, I bet you this is what's gonna happen, and it's exactly what happened. And it's the way the third act is just so boring and lame, and everything goes exactly the way you thought it was gonna go. And they don't add anything new. There's nothing interesting here besides the idea of, watchers, of things watching you, and you don't know what they look like. You can't see them. If you see them, you die, apparently. And you have no idea why they're watching you, why you can't escape these weird woods. All that's pretty interesting. And then, besides that, there's nothing interesting in this movie. Another drawback, I would say, is I don't know if it's the acting or the writing. I think I'm going to blame the writing here, but it's just characters just didn't seem real. I think this movie would have been a lot more entertaining if our characters were a bit more charismatic. But if you take away their physical characteristics and they all look like the exact same person, it would be very difficult for you to tell who's who, because their personalities are so flat, they're so blank, and this is especially the case with our main character. And I don't think it's the acting. I think it is the writing. It's just flat. I get the flat characters. There's not really much change besides getting over past trauma, which is something that happens in these movies all the time. And I think if you had a character, and I'm not saying you have to have someone like, Martin Lawrence's character from Bad Boys in here to add some levity. You don't need something that over the top, but just some sort of personality traits amongst our four protagonists to differentiate them. Because as it is, I was very uninterested, and I did not care if these people lived or died, because I didn't know them really as people. We get backstories from them, kinda, but they're just kind of told to us, and we don't have a connection between audience and character that you would want. So when you have that connection, you do care if someone lives or dies, and that's not what happens here. But on positive notes, the soundtrack, I think, is pretty decent. I found myself enjoying the soundtrack. I liked all the strings that were going on. And I do think whoever the cinematographer is, or whoever set up these shots, I found the shots of the forest to be very beautiful and very interesting. And they did a really good job of setting the tone and the mood for the story. Again, most of these shots are in the beginning of the movie, where the movie is the strongest because you don't really know what's going on and you're still asking all these questions. So yeah, kind of a bit of a bummer for me. I was hoping that this movie would be a bit more interesting, but once questions start getting answered, I lost interest really quickly. So I would not recommend going out to see this movie unless you are curious to see for yourself, in which case The Watchers is in theaters and you can go ahead and check it out.